Welcome to Dataverse by Nina Paul, episode 40. So if you've ever felt, the absolute soul-crushing pain of a delayed dashboard.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right. Or watched a massive reporting project just completely go off the rails, you probably did what most of us do. You blamed the software.
Naturally. It's the easy target.
Exactly. You think, oh, the tech stack just isn't up to the task, or, I don't know, the developers wrote terrible code. But for this deep dive, we're looking at a stack of research and internal postmortems from actual Power BI delivery teams that it completely flips that script.
It really does. Because when you dig into the actual operations of a Power BI team, they almost never blame the technology for a failed sprint.
Never.
Practically never. According to the research we're looking at today, the closest call they've ever seen to a total project failure, it didn't come from a software bug. It came from a business requirement that nobody voiced out loud.
Wow.
Yeah, and they only discovered it after the development was entirely finished.
Which is just, that's mind-blowing to think about. You spend all that time and money, and the mechanism that destroys the project was just sitting in the room the whole time, completely invisible.
100%.
So today, we're unpacking the reality of Power BI implementations. We've got a breakdown of the actual 6-phase process of why these builds fail and how sequencing and budgeting actually work. So, a missed requirement never turns into a costly rebuild for you and your team.
And to understand how a catastrophic misunderstanding even happens in a professional setting, we really have to look at the very first hurdle.
Right, which is language. It's just language. Clients and developers are often speaking two completely different dialects when they use the phrase, we want to implement Power BI.
Right. They say the same words but mean totally different things.
Exactly. 3 different buyers will walk into a room, use that exact same sentence, and they literally mean 3 vastly different projects. Okay, let's unpack this because I want to break down those 3 different projects. If a development team gets the scoping wrong here, they've basically engineered their own failure on call number 1, right? What's the actual difference?
So the first scenario is a net new build.
Okay.
This is your blank slate.
Okay.
You're dealing with undocumented business logic that the company has never actually reported on before. Then the second one is an Excel replacement.
Which I'm guessing is a lot of untangling.
Massive amounts of untangling. It's reverse engineering these huge spreadsheet formulas that some former employee wrote 3 years ago and nobody ever bothered to document.
Classic.
Right. And the third one is a tool migration. So, for example, moving from an existing platform like Tableau or Click over to Power BI.
Okay, that sounds exactly like hiring a contractor and saying, hey, build me a house.
Yeah.
But the contractor has no idea if they are supposed to be building on, a completely empty lot or renovating a 100-year-old Victorian with bad plumbing.
That is a great analogy.
Or, trying to build an exact replica of the neighbor's house. You can't just say, build a house and expect the crew to show up with the right materials.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it because the underlying physics of those 3 jobs are totally different. In a net new build, your biggest enemy is scope creep.
Because there's no defined logic yet.
Exactly. In an Excel replacement, the risk is losing those mysterious nested formulas in translation. And in a migration, the massive hidden risk is unstated expectations because users are already anchored to their old report.
Oh, right. They want it to look the same.
Secretly, yeah. They expect the new tool to look and feel identically to the old one, even if they don't say it.
Which brings up what the source text calls the disambiguation test. It's this remarkably simple 2-question filter to figure out which of the 3 houses you are building.
Right. And question 1 is, what does the reporting look like today?
And question 2, is there an existing report that anyone expects the new one to resemble?
And the staggering part of this research is how rarely that second question is asked before scoping begins. Skipping that is precisely how you end up with an unstated requirement that detonates your timeline weeks later.
Ooh.
Which introduces a really powerful conceptual model from the data, requirement debt.
Yes, let's talk about requirement debt, because we hear about technical debt all the time in software, right?
Yeah.
Where you write lazy code now and pay for it later.
Yeah.
But requirement debt is different. It's like a hairline fracture in the foundation of that house we're building.
That's the perfect visual. Think of an unstated requirement as a fracture that grows under the weight of every new floor you build on top of it.
The interest rate compounds.
Exactly. It compounds with every single phase of development it survives. The documentation breaks this down brilliantly. If you clarify a requirement in the initial gathering phase, fixing it costs a simple conversation. It's basically free.
Just a quick chat.
Right. But if it surfaces a few weeks later during the design phase, now it costs a wireframe revision. Annoying, but manageable.
But if it survives into the actual build phase, you're looking at a structural model change. And if it's only discovered at the very end, like when the client finally clicks through the dashboard,
It costs a complete rebuild. The foundation cracks and the whole house comes down.
wow. Which is why the first stage of any proper implementation requirement gathering is so fragile. It's about establishing the actual business logic, not just asking, what pretty charts they want on the screen.
But human nature works against us here. The research includes a great observation from Oshameta on the delivery team. Clients constantly want to rush to the final output.
They want the shiny objects.
Exactly. Everyone wants to see the shiny object, so they pressure the team to compress this initial gathering phase. And the data is definitive on this. Compressing that logic gathering phase births almost every downstream failure.
Because once you think you have the requirements, you move into phase 2, which is data consolidation.
Right. Unifying all these disparate data sources into a cohesive model.
Now, wait, I have to push back a little here, or at least ask a question. When we talk about data consolidation being this massive bottleneck, isn't that basically just a volume and processing issue?
How do you mean?
Like if I have a billion rows of transaction data, it's just going to take the servers and the developers longer to crunch it, right?
See, it's a very common assumption, but the operations data explicitly corrects this. The true obstacle is almost never data volume. Compute power is cheap and fast.
Okay.
The actual nightmare is dealing with source structures built years apart by different teams for totally different purposes.
Meaning they were never actually designed to talk to each other in the first place.
Not even remotely. Imagine pulling data from a legacy CRM system and a modern billing system. They might not even agree on what a customer ID is.
Oh, right. One uses an email, the other uses a corporate tax ID.
Precisely.
Yep.
Or they define a reporting period in conflicting ways. One uses a calendar month, the other uses a rolling 4-week retail calendar.
Oh, wow, that completely changes the picture. So the developers aren't just hooking up pipes, they are being forced to act as business mediators.
That's it exactly. Reconciling those mismatches is where the engineering hours just vaporize. And this is where that requirement debt we talked about rears its ugly head. When two systems are sitting there disagreeing on the definition of a sale, you suddenly realize you didn't define your logic clearly enough in phase 1.
Right, which sets up phase 3 nicely. Assuming you survive consolidation, you finally have your data talking. Now you have to give it a shape.
Wireframing.
Wireframing. And the documentation emphasizes that this is the bridge between the theoretical agreement and the actual build.
It is the blueprint. And what's fascinating here is the impact of preparation. The case studies show that if a client actually comes prepared, like if they supply the wireframes and logic before development starts, the whole engagement can wrap in just 1 to 2 weeks.
Because the groundwork is done.
Yeah, the team is just executing.
Right.
But if they skip that blueprint, the project bleeds heavily into phase 4, report development.
Right, where the visuals and model relationships are actually coded. And here's where it gets really interesting for the listeners, because this is where hidden requirement debt usually explodes.
Oh, big time.
The research highlights the specific phenomenon they call tableau parity failure.
This is such a cautionary tale. There's a real-world case study from Preeti Barnapanda, an escalation lead. She stepped into a project where the client's requirement seemed incredibly simple. Move our reporting to Power BI.
Seems easy enough.
Right. But there was a massive unstated expectation. The client secretly expected their new Power BI report to look exactly, pixel for pixel, like their old Tableau report.
And I want to pause here just to explain why that's a problem, because it's not just developers being stubborn. Tableau and Power BI are fundamentally different beneath the hood, right?
Completely different.
Tableau operates almost like a free-form canvas, super flexible with drawing visuals, but Power BI is much more rigid, grid-based, and it relies heavily on its semantic model and this formula language called DAX data analysis expressions.
Right. They are simply not identical twins. And that mechanical difference is the friction point. Some Tableau visuals simply have no direct equivalent in Power BI.
So what did the developers do?
They did what problem solvers do. They used substitute DAX logic and alternative visuals to approximate the output. But because that strict parity requirement was never explicitly stated, that substitution was never brought to the client for sign-off.
Oh, no. So the developers assumed they were providing a smart alternative, and the client assumed they were getting an exact replica.
Exactly. And when they presented the first draft, it landed with incredibly harsh feedback. It was rejected outright. An escalation lead had to tear it down and rebuild it just to force visual parity.
And the documentation notes there's no grand recovery narrative there. It's just the brutal cost of a requirement staying undetected 2 phases too long.
Yeah, it's painful. And it shows how assumptions act as massive blind spots. Neither side says their assumption out loud because they both think it's obvious.
Which is exactly why the next stage, phase 5, quality control and number validation, is so critical. And we need to be clear. Validation doesn't mean checking if the charts look pretty.
Oh, not at all.
It means rigorously reconciling the numbers on the finished report against the original source systems. Because if a business user spots a wrong number,
The project is essentially dead on arrival. The stakes couldn't be higher. If you're trusting this new dashboard to run your quarterly review and you spot one metric off by 5%, the cost isn't the 10 minutes to fix a formula. The cost is the credibility of the entire platform.
I know that feeling intimately. The second I find a bad number in a financial report, I am never trusting that dashboard again.
Ever.
I'm exporting everything to Excel and checking it by hand.
And the second a user starts manually double-checking the BI tool's work, the tool has failed its core purpose. You've just added friction.
So how do teams prevent this? The research points to phase 6, staged client feedback. Ashwamedha argues feedback has to be a continuous loop distributed throughout development, not a single dramatic reveal at the end.
This actively pushes back against how most corporate projects are run, right? The default is end-loaded feedback. You wait until it's done.
Right, which is like a chef cooking a 7-course meal behind a closed door versus letting you taste the soup while it's still on the stove.
I love that.
Right. If the chef waits until the end to bring out the whole feast and it turns out I'm allergic to garlic, we have to throw the entire meal out. But if I taste the broth early, they just adjust the recipe.
That's a brilliant way to conceptualize it. And understanding how these phases interact entirely shifts how you should look at timelines and costs.
Let's dive into timelines, because if you're listening and you handle budgets, pay attention here. The documentation says to throw out those standard 90-day implementation benchmarks you see online.
Yeah, those are just sales pitches. True duration is a mathematical formula based on 4 variables. Source count, how many systems feed the model. Report count, the volume of outputs. Requirement complexity, how well-defined your logic is. And lastly, client readiness.
Did they supply wireframes, or are we starting from scratch?
Exactly.
And the research gives a phenomenal example of this. 2 different clients in the exact same education sector using the same delivery partner. One client finished in just 1 to 2 weeks, simply because they supplied the wireframes and logic up front.
While the other took over a month for a single report because they needed conflicting sources consolidated and logic defined from scratch.
Yeah.
That is a 4x difference based purely on preparation.
Which leads to the financial side. The sources break down a 2-track cost model. Track 1 is services the human element, billed hourly, scaling with effort.
But track 2 is infrastructure, and it behaves completely differently. It scales with data volume and user count, renewing annually. This is the hidden trap. And a critical element here revolves around the F64 threshold.
Okay, we need to define this because the F64 threshold appears to be the biggest financial cliff in the entire ecosystem.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
F64 is a specific benchmark of compute capacity in Microsoft's Fabric licensing. Think of it as renting a massive server. If you pay for F64 or larger, users with a free license can view your content.
But if you are below that threshold,
Every single viewer needs their own paid individual license, like a pro or premium per user license, a monthly fee for every single person.
so if you have 500 people who just need to casually view a report, knowing if you're over or under that F64 line drastically alters your budget. You desperately need that math before you sign a contract.
Exactly. Which is why the documentation's advice on evaluating a partner is so crucial. Don't just look at technical coding skills. Look at their pre-proposal process. Do they do a proof of concept, a POC?
Right. There's a great case study where a prospect needed external report distribution. Instead of just saying, sure, Neonopal stopped, ran a POC to validate PDF delivery below the F64 limit before promising it.
That is the gold standard, proving feasibility first. Because reversing a structural decision mid-implementation usually costs the client relationship.
But the upside, if you get all this right, is staggering. A client doing manual Excel work saw their time to final numbers drop by 50 to 60% after doing this correctly.
Because the friction was gone. The reports were instantly readable and actionable.
So, synthesizing all this for you, the listener, evaluating a BI partner is really a test of their boundaries. A great partner stops you and says, wait, before we build, What exactly is the business logic here?
That's the core takeaway. It's communication and sequencing, not just software engineering. Your first question should be, are we building a new house or renovating an old one?
Always start with the blueprint. Now, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, slightly terrifying statistic. Gartner projects that 80% of data governance initiatives will fail by 2027. 80%. Due to a lack of business drivers.
That is a staggering failure rate.
It really is. So here's a provocative question for you to mull over. If a true Power BI implementation forces a company to finally define its messy business logic from scratch, could buying a dashboard actually be the greatest Trojan horse for forcing corporate alignment you could ever deploy?
I love that.
Right. You think you're buying pretty charts, but you're actually forcing sales and marketing to sit in a room and agree on what a customer is.
You're essentially buying organizational clarity disguised as a software project.
And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions before you start building, and we'll catch you on the next one.